play.
Avery Road.
Oh, cool.
Wisconsin can be
so cold.
The scales of justice can
be rolled.
If we accept life big and bold, all we forget, we live on Avery Road. We live on Avery Road.
Why can't I find the video?
Should be easy to see. This could be you. Could be me. We shouldn't say bye. Accepting everything that we are told. I live on Avery Road. I live on Avery Road. Woo, woo. Play that guitar. Get down. I live on Avery
Road. On Avery Road.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, Scooby.
Hello, Erekose and everybody out there. Hi, Raul is there, Susan, Amber. Oh, yes, I would be fun to do that with. Wendra, Ziggy, everybody's here. That's so great to see.
I want that dog, Travis.
That is a cute dog. I don't know whose dog that is.
Oh, see, he's calling you Abraham Lincoln again.
Abraham Lincoln. Actually, Travis, I had.
Hey, did you see the jib jab Paul made about you, Travis? Yeah.
Travis, I only recently found out that where that was from. I had no idea what that meant, but I learned it was from Wayne's World.
Yes,
Wayne's World.
Yep. He's a total Abraham Lincoln.
And I actually, which is surprising because I kind of grew up with that Wayne's World. I used to like them, but for some reason I forgot that term. Oh, so I get it now, Travis.
I love when he goes in to play the guitar. He goes to hit the. He's like, "Oh, Stairway denied."
That is such a classic. You know, some of those old, SNL programs.
Oh, hell yeah. Mike Myers, man. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
He did well after SNL.
Yeah.
So.
If I was president, Travis. Well, we'll work on that. Yeah.
Right. Scooby for president, 2020.
Yeah. I don't think that'd be a good idea.
Let's see. If Bugs Bunny were a girl bunny, she'd be Abraham Lincoln. I don't know. I don't remember that part.
Yeah. I
Where
wish
is Scooby
Scooby.
the dog?
Oh,
Oh,
I wish Scooby was my neighbor instead of the creepy guy with the white van. Well, yeah, I think anybody would be better than the creepy guy with the
right?
white van.
Yeah.
It sounds like, wow, those lights are cool. Thank you, Travis. I have blue lights tonight. I thought I'd just kind of shake it up a little.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops, they're falling down. Okay, well,
I'm
I
pretty
didn't have
sure
much.
pot is still illegal in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You get
Oh,
20
is
years, I
pot?
think, just for having a joint.
No, Travis, it is not legal here. Not even for medicinal purposes.
Yeah, Wisconsin's.
Yeah, Wisconsin is not.
Yeah, did you guys
Yeah.
see Travis? Did you guys see Travis on Laura's video yesterday? He's totally trying to romance her and sweep her off to Scotland. I mean,
Ooh,
dude, Travis is a playboy, man. Travis is a
Travis,
playboy here.
Travis, the player. Hi, Charlo.
How's it going, everybody? How's it going, everybody? Hello, Millbilly.
Hi, Millbilly. Yeah, we got the whole group here. That's great, or a lot of the group.
Fair amount of people. It's already 61 people. I'm sure that's going to go up.
Yeah. So thanks for coming. Thanks for coming on Saturday night and hanging out with Erekose and I.
Yep. So to give people an idea of what's coming here this week, Travis and I,
Oh, it's a big week. It's a
we're
big
either
week, folks.
we're either
Very
gonna
exciting.
we're either gonna be covering the entire, kind of, well, in mostly in its entirety, the original motion for post conviction relief. We're going to be trying to break it up into about 5 segments, basically trying to cover 1 segment per day. This is going to be a tall order. We're either going to do it or we're going to die trying. But hopefully, we just got the help before this live started of Julie Johnston. And hopefully, we're going to be able to create some PowerPoints to go along with what we're talking about that's going to make it more easily understandable, and with the visual references that'll make it easier for you guys to follow along. So this is something we've been trying to work on for the last week and a half, 2 weeks. Looks like it may be coming together, but it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to be pretty exhausting. But I wanted to go ahead and give you guys the heads up that was happening. It's going to be hopefully very interesting, because when we go over everything that's in the motion, and then also adding in some of the things that came in the supplement motions, and particularly what happened with the CD and the Brady violation, the potential Brady violation of the CD, and what was on the DASI computer, we're going to get that all added in so that everybody understand what information is actually moving forward on appeal at the moment, and so that everybody can understand what she's going to be arguing in court right now. It's going to be basically what she's arguing in the motion we're going to be covering this week. And we're just doing this so that people understand what the talking points are. And to also help people understand what we mean by she can't just like wing in new information at this point. At this point, she is bringing a set of scientific results and her version of the facts and the way things went down, and this is what she's currently in the appeals court for, and so we're hopefully going to be able to help people understand that a little better, and that's the idea of it. Also, by the way, JD McLaren, if you're watching, yes, thank you. I'm glad you got your shirt and you're totally happy. Make sure that when you go out and wear it, that you get yourself a picture of yourself wearing it and post it for me on Twitter.
Oh,
Please.
yeah, that's a good idea.
JD McLaren was the contest winner, folks. He won one of the. We did a video where we gave away 3 control question T-shirts, and he was one of the winners. I saw on Twitter yesterday he had received his. So yay! All right.
Yay!
Marissa should be getting hers. I don't know what's going on there because I can't get in touch with her for some reason. And Andrew Jackson over in the UK, may take him a little longer to get his to the UK. So I anticipate in the next day or 2, we'll be hearing about Andrew Jackson getting his. But Marissa should be getting her 3 shirts that I sent her because she did such a bang-up job as moderator here in the first month and a half or so. She really, really did a phenomenal job. So she deserved those extra 2 shirts. She earned them. Hopefully she's getting those. And so, there we go. So hopefully everybody's going to enjoy those. But hey, when you get your free control question t-shirt that you won, please take a picture of yourself wearing it and tweet it to me, send it to me somehow, post it on the Erekose AMAM Facebook page, something. Do something so that it gets to me. Please. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about this legal information because I'm just clueless to all that. So that'll be fabulous.
Yeah. So
we
haven't really
I'll be
talked
one.
about anything yet, folks. I've been just talking about kind of little other peripheral stuff here. So we haven't really gotten into it yet. We're going to be talking about the death certificate, though. Some of you have been talking about the death certificate, questioning about the death certificate, things about the death certificate. So we understand that. We're
and
hopefully,
related issues.
and hopefully we're going to be able to clear up some of the things going on around it tonight. Certainly there's an issue of should things like what happened on this death certificate be acceptable or not. There's going to be a lot of questioning of that going on here, but ultimately, I think in the end, when it comes down to it, we're gonna be kind of left with the conclusion that although we may have certain issues with this, ultimately the courts don't, and that pretty much in most courts across the United States, that a death certificate in this state would be perfectly acceptable to use to proceed in court. I think you'll find that's where we ultimately land. But raising the questions of whether or not we're good with the lack of real scientific means of determining death and stuff. We have to determine for ourselves whether or not we're cool with the courts being okay with a death certificate in this situation. Obviously, It's okay right now, but moving forward, are we cool with that?
Right, and the way
sorry,
and the way the way the system is in Wisconsin, which is a little different than it is in some other states, with who is able to make some of these determinations.
Yes, and Travis is very vocal about that as well.
Yeah, so this is partially just kind of educational because
they're just kind of undertrained as coroners and MEs there.
Correct. And many people are confused, especially if they are from another state, because where things are different. Right. So, and they just assume that a coroner means things that it doesn't necessarily hear. And in this case, that is relevant. Okay.
So just pulling my monitor closer.
And then there are some interesting things about. Well, we'll go on. We'll talk about it as we go along. Just things to make you think, which is like what we like to do here, or what I like to do here when I'm with Erekose, is get you thinking.
Jill, nobody's talking about birth certificates so far, so I'm not sure what you're referring to there. We're talking about a death certificate here today. We're not talking about anybody's birth certificates. Just wanted to clear that up.
Amberley, Wisconsin is a messed up state. Well, yeah. I'm not going to argue with that one.
But. Death, yes. Let's see. Death certificate. Okay, so Jill meant death certificate, not birth certificate. So okay. All right. So starting out, Scoobs, you've obviously been listening and seeing people talking about the death certificate in the last couple days, week or so, and what their concerns were with it. Tell us what you feel that people, the issues that people are having with this death certificate, kind of the main ones.
Well, the main issues are there's probably two main issues. One is with there are many issues, but I could boil it down to two main things that I hear. One main one is with the death certificate itself, and why is she listed as deceased on November 10th, 2005?
Right.
When there's really no why is a death certificate then officially completed on 12/05/15 I'm sorry, 15, that's the wrong year, oh 05,
Right.
when when really your body is not really identified yet officially, and we'll talk about that. And again, that's because, and this is where it gets tricky, as Travis mentions with the law. Like Travis
Well, you
wrote
used to
me,
need
and
a body, is the way Travis explained it. But
pardon me.
now, the way I was talking to Travis before we went live here, and the way he was
Mm-hmm.
explaining is that back in the old days, you did need a body. You had to actually have a body to
Right.
really
Well,
bring charges. He said, but that's kind of changed in recent years. Now you just need, basically proof, that of something, happening, basically, and basically the testimony of somebody saying they haven't heard from that person in days, basically. He said
yeah. Well, it depends on.
just that is enough. And as long as our courts see that as enough, that's going to allow
Yeah.
things like this death certificate to continue to be okay.
Yeah, but that depends on the state. And in Wisconsin, they have actually in 2013 or at some later time after this date, they did maybe. And if somebody is in like, has shown to be in like, I don't know what, some kind of like dire circumstances, like they were in a boat and fell off in the middle of the sea or something, and then maybe you can. But this case is very unusual, and it brings up, it's unusual because theoretically, yes, there is, and this people get confused about the autopsy. And the second, I'll just finish answering the first question before I go off because I'm trying to do that. The second question that or area of confusion I see a lot is people say, why didn't is about the autopsy, and why, well, first of all, why wasn't the coroner there, or why was there a need for somebody else to be involved in the autopsy? And that's because in Wisconsin, and I'm not sure how many other states this is true, and
Hmm.
sometimes, ideally, your medical examiner or coroner, and I have a slide that'll, that I, little visual that I did make for this time to show the difference between the two, because the two are kind of interchangeable, but there's some subtle differences. But they don't have to be an MD. So a
Right.
coroner or an MD is, in one sense, in a kind of especially in these small towns, kind of like a bureaucratic position almost. Now, if you live in a big city like I do, your medical examiners are all MDs. They're pathologists, so they do everything. We have a big medical examiner's office where there's like a lot of medical examiners, and they do the autopsies and they do the death thing because they can.
Right.
But where people get confused is, and this is kind of interesting because a coroner is the difference between a coroner and a med. So basically, they are the official in the county that, basically uh, signs death certificates. Now,
Why don't we put up your
I
little
yeah,
visual aid?
put up my little visual aid. So in Wisconsin, because I wanted to show you the requirements. Technically, ideally, your coroner or ME is an MD, but in these rural areas like Manitowoc and Calumet, you can't. There actually is a shortage of pathologists in Wisconsin and
All right.
maybe in other parts of the state. Okay. So this was part of a presentation. So in Wisconsin, 1/3 of the counties have medical examiners, and again, ideally, usually if you can, you're going to get an MD, but legal. This is the law, and this is for Travis. Legally, and this is from a presentation by Michael Steer, who's a very reputable, very vocal ME in the state of Wisconsin, who actually was the one who supposedly did Teresa Halbach's autopsy, and we'll get to that later. However, this is from a presentation he did. So 1/3 of counties have medical examiners. The legal requirement to be a medical examiner is none. A legal examiner is
In
an
other words, you don't even
appointed,
have to be a medical doctor. You don't
right,
have to, yeah.
technically. The other two, and the coroner, which is basically the same thing. However, it's an elected position. That's the main thing. So there you have to be 18, there are a few more restrictions. You have to be a non-felon resident of the county and win a county election.
Yes.
So actually, again, legally, that's the definition. Now, ideally, here's the gold standard, like he calls this the gold standard. Ideally, who you have doing your autopsy is a forensic pathologist. And somebody, this is funny because somebody, I won't name her, but she said, "Are you the one who said you put forensics in front of a science?" And then that sort of discredits it. And I said, yeah, that would be me. And often that's true, but actually here I would say that's not true because this is a medical specialty. So these
Right.
people, forensic pathologists, are pathologists, which is a medical doctor who looks at dead people, is specializes in looking at dead people, and the forensics thrown in. So they often are schooled in looking at some of these more bizarre situations, like a burned body, whereas the average MD would not be, or the average, or a nurse or somebody. So this a forensic pathologist is an MD who has specialty training, employed in certain places. However, he does go on to say, and this is a problem, we
How
won't get
so?
into a lot.
Okay, so I guess the question I'm left with here is how many forensic pathologists are there floating around there in Wisconsin? Not a lot, right? A handful, basically.
Right, and that's a problem. They're actually, and if I had more time, I was actually going to call Michael Steer, and I don't think he'd talk to me about this case, but because he talks a lot about the medical examiner shortage, he probably would talk to me about that in general.
Right.
So, you're right, and the problem is that there is a shortage of them. So often, and then in these places like Manitowoc, they don't have a lot of murders and suspicious deaths.
Right.
So on one hand, it doesn't really pay for them to hire, to pay the salary that one of these people would command.
But another takeaway
So
here is that basically none of these people who are examining dead bodies in Wisconsin are required to be a medical doctor. The forensic pathologists are just there. There's no requirements really for them. They're just forensic pathologists, and they just happen to be MDs, right? But when it comes to medical examiners and coroners, there's no real hardcore requirement that they actually be an MD.
okay, but now, and let me clarify this because this is where the confusion comes in. So this is good. So right, so I could be a coroner, I guess technically. Now, usually they do try to get like a medical person,
Right.
like in Manitowoc and Calumet, they're nurses at least. So that's close.
Okay. Right.
But theoretically, like you said, they could be. However, to do an autopsy, and I'm sorry, Travis, I don't have the statute because to show you, but I can give it to you later. To do an autopsy legally in the state of Wisconsin, you must be a licensed MD with a specialty in pathology. So these coroners can sign a death certificate. They can pronounce someone dead, a coroner or an MD, even whether or not they have, which again, like I said, is interesting to me because a nurse cannot pronounce someone dead, but a coroner or ME can, even if they only have those requirements. Now, one of the things is these laws are, obviously antiquated and just haven't been updated. But if you are in any major city or major more populated urban area, You're always going to have an MD. So what these counties do, because a lot of people, for instance, in another case, and I don't know if we want to use the name, but that people had asked me to look in, there were a lot of questions about why was her body sent out to do an autopsy, and some people were putting nefarious
Because
reasons onto that.
none of the coroners
But
or medical examiners were qualified to do it. That's why.
correct. So there was nothing shady about that. In fact, that is the in fact Deb, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering her last name, the Manitowoc County coroner was doing
Deb
the
Kakich.
correct thing.
Yeah.
Yes, in sending the body out for an autopsy. And usually they contract. So there's a lot of physicians who contract on the side to do
Okay.
autopsies for places like this where they can't do autopsies. So the autopsy has to be done by somebody who is an MD. So that's the basic lowdown. So hopefully that helps clarify some of that
Right.
for some people who have questions about that. So now by law, so now in the Teresa Hall bucket, so now some people will say, well, there was no body per se. And yes, there is no body, but even I don't know if anybody ever watched that TV. There used to be this TV show on, Dr. G, Medical Examiner. She was pretty good. She was from Florida. It was like a reality show, but it was
Yeah.
educational. Anyway, but she would often explain, sometimes there isn't like what we would call a body, but a forensic pathologist still, looks at what is available. So for instance, in this case, the remains would be considered, that's what you would be doing the autopsy on. And so, what the medical examiner, who is ideally, especially in this case, I would think they would make sure that somebody who is experienced in looking at this kind of material would be involved.
Right.
And Michael Steer was. So the autopsy would be basically it would be another set of eyes, hopefully a more objective set of eyes than the forensics anthropologist looking at the bones, because he's looking for a medical reason. He would look at all of the material that's available, and also look into some of the background, idea and the crime scene, and then come up with some conclusions about it. Basically, the conclusions that, well, obviously there's no need to pronounce, this person dead, but he would come up, the forensic pathologist would come up with and then there's two different things that I want to explain. There's cause of death and manner of death. And so those things, the cause of death would be determined by the pathologist. So in this, and we'll talk about this later, when I talk about getting into a little bit of the hanky, no, as Stacy says in one of his songs, naughtiness about the body
Naughtiness.
in this case, naughtiness. So he was correct. So the cause of
First,
death.
you got to get a
So
body. I don't know how, but I know that it's naughty.
it's naughty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So cause of death is how the person died. And sometimes that's very obvious. They had a bullet through their head. However, in this case, it would be no ethical medical examiner would be able to would say their cause of death. So
Right.
correctly, and it was on this death certificate, the cause of death was unknown, because you can't know from these remains how the person actually died.
Unless you're a forensic pathologist and you're looking at the beveling on the skull. You have to be qualified to see it, I would say, right?
No, no, no. Even if you are qualified to see it, that's what I'm saying. The person who did the autopsy would have been qualified, but you don't know if that's what killed them,
Oh,
because you
yeah.
don't know. You don't know if they were shot like in the aorta first and they bled out before
Right.
that stuff happened. You can't know without the rest of the body what actually killed them, even if they're. And this is where, well, I'll just jump ahead. This is where Jensen, who was put on the case, Jeffrey Jensen, to testify, medical examiner. Well, right away I said, called bull s on him, because you saw him, and Buting even tried to discredit him, because on the death certificate it says cause of death unknown, because you cannot know how the person died from looking at these fragments. And there was Jensen, and this is personal theory, not personal theory. I believe Michael Steer, and I'll talk a little bit more about his background,
Mhm.
I believe he probably would not have felt comfortable going along with the bullet through the head um, theory, because Jensen was testifying that the cause of death was this bullet through the head. And that's not possible, because he can't know that, even if there was a bullet through the head, because he can't know if something else killed her first, and that
Well,
bullet from this
that was the
material.
prosecution's theory.
Yeah, right. And they got a medical examiner to support it, and
Yes.
that's a problem. And but basically, it was bullshit. What he said, and any no reputable medical examiner who is a MD would say that, because you can't. Because I don't, we don't know if, as Brendan said, he slit her throat first. Well, maybe that was what killed her, and then she
Right.
was shot. You can't know. Does that make sense to you
Yeah.
and to everybody out there?
No, I know what
Okay.
you mean. They can't know for certain. I mean, they weren't able to
Right.
inspect the tissue and know what happened to the tissue that would have allowed them to potentially bleed out or whatever. I mean, without the tissue, I see what you mean, where it creates more uncertainty. Um, but once again, I think the courts are willing to look around that. I
Well,
mean,
actually, on this death certificate, they did say unknown. They did say unknown as the cause of death, but
right.
right. But Jensen testified. However, someone should have. I mean, if I was there, I'd have jumped up and said, "Hello, you can't say that."
Let's have a look at it. Oops. Gotta get it on the screen first.
Yeah, it's kind of.
So, anyway, this is the death certificate, folks. You can find it at stephenaverycase.org. All the
Yeah,
seals, all the officials, markings, and whatever.
yeah.
And I'm going to show you a blown up
So
version.
we can just go through. We can just go through some of the.
All right.
So okay, so some of the sketchiness or questioning around this death certificate was, why was it, had to do with the dates. Let me just finish the other thing. So what the medical pathologist will decide is, okay, so cause of death means what killed the person. And in this case, the correct thing, and you see that down in the left hand corner, he has
Unknown.
and he has, that's actually not here, but he actually, and the
Says it.
writing, I'm assuming, is Michael Glazer, and he has estimated date of death unknown, which is accurate, which I think is accurate.
Right.
However, initially, when this death certificate was initiated, and I do not know who initiated it, although it appears to have been done at the funeral home, because all of that is typed by the Weeding family funeral home. A date of death is listed as, or pronounced dead, on November 10th, 2005, and then it's signed by the funeral service director. You see that signature? It looks like a big blob.
Hmm.
Okay. So all of that was done, and I don't know. Now, interesting, again, coincidence, I don't know. Because on November 10th, you didn't have anything done at the lab.
Yeah, it's literally
All
2 days
the
after the found.
the
I mean, I
only
don't know how they
thing,
could be at a funeral home in Wheating if Leslie Eisenberg is still, inspecting them.
right. So once again, I am just pointing out things that I think are interesting. I'm not making inferences here.
I know, yeah, that is
Oh,
interesting.
right. Oh,
Technically, that's when Eisenberg would be inspecting these. So it's unless she was inspecting them at this funeral home, if that's
no,
the place where they decided to
right.
set up
But
shop on
that's a
this.
Yeah, but that's the thing, actually, Eric, that actually Eisenberg has nothing to do with this. The medical exam, the medical examiner who was purportedly in this case, but then now let me tell you about this later, Michael Steer, okay? She is a forensics person. She's a legal person. She has nothing to do with this is a medical document, if you will. Somebody
Mm-hmm.
says his physician's license number is 008. Actually, that's his license number because he's a nurse anesthetist, and I guess there's only 8 in the state. That's why his number is 8. Remember, Michael Klaser is a nurse, not a physician. And he's
Right.
a nurse anesthetist. That's like a specialty. So there's only 8 of them. That's why his number is 8. That is his number. I looked it up. So anyway, so somebody went to the funeral home and decided to initiate this death certificate. And it was signed, and you see the date is November 10th. The same date, and one other thing, 10th, 2005, anybody know what? Okay,
What?
I'll answer. Why just I wait and see?
I just
Okay, William Travis says I am flat. Somebody is flat wrong. I don't know who he's talking about. That is his ME number. It's not his ME number, it's his nurse number. Yes, that is his number, Travis, and I'll show you that later, okay? I don't know if the zeros are right, but yeah, that's his number. He's a nurse. He's not a medical, he's not an MD. He's a nurse, anesthetist, and there's not very many.
all right.
Okay,
Well,
now I know it isn't his number. Okay, well you can anyway. I'm not going to argue with people here. So let's. What was I talking? What was I talking about? Oh, I will tell you what happened on November 10th. Stephen Avery was pulled out of the database and identified as the source of the blood, and the other blood was identified as female blood. Yet, according to someone, that was apparently enough to pronounce Teresa Halbach dead. And I will leave you with your own to make your own judgments about that.
that's the legal standard, and that's what legally passes. And so there's also the point, though. You gotta
I
you
don't, I
gotta you
don't,
gotta
I don't,
acknowledge that
I
Mr.
don't know.
Strang nor Mr. Buting raised any real concerns about this death certificate at
Right.
trial.
But I don't know if it's the legal standard, Erekose, and that's the problem because if you looked at that one slide, and that's a problem that Michael Steer is always talking about and I actually have more documentation, papers and stuff that I can, put in the Scooby school, of course. There's a lot of question about what the standard is. I mean, most deaths are not as complicated as this. I mean, this is obviously a very complicated issue, but what is the standard? I mean, I think most people would argue no, that is not a reasonable standard to declare someone dead.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly don't know if it's legal or not. But as Michael Steer says, there really aren't any standards. This is another area where there's a lot of problems. They wanted, her to be. So anyway, so that's an issue. Now, later on, the rest of this document is filled out by Michael Klaser, and it's handwritten, except for a few things that are typed, but the font is different. And that was on 1205. 05. And the same date that
Mhm.
Sherry Culhane produces her second lab report, and the where she identifies Teresa Halbach's blood as Teresa Halbach, and then she mentions that she has a partial profile as BZ. However, the bones still have not been identified yet. And the next day, you have a preliminary hearing where Stephen Avery is going to be charged with murder. So, in order to have a murder, you have to have a dead body. So now you have a death certificate that's really based on uh, bones, I'll say, that have not been identified yet because they're still out at the FBI. And there's a big press conference on January 19th, 2006, that says remains confirmed as Teresa Halbach. And again, I put the links to that in Scooby School, unless Denise can pull that up because it was in the chat last night. So again, this is just
Somebody's saying that the anesthetic the anesthetic license numbers are 629483030. Somebody's, I don't know where they got that from, but they're saying that that's what it is.
Okay, well, I'll get on the computer, but when I did look it up, which was a couple years ago now, that was correct. Unless they changed something. So let's look that up while you're talking. You can entertain the fans. I'll look that up later. But the other thing, so
yes, Tony. According to the FBI, they said that those bones are Teresa's, and Kratz ran with it.
Right, but that was not until that report was dated January 17th, 2005. So now, the other big issue with this death certificate is that there's a box and it's not big enough to be blown up where it says autopsy. And it's checked yes. Now, somebody said, well, okay, is that okay if perhaps there's an autopsy pending? Maybe yes, maybe no. And however, at the time that this report was filled out, there was no autopsy. And the autopsy would be, the medical, an MD, a pathologist looking at these bones. Now that was done. The bones were, I don't have the bones were shipped to Michael Steer in Madison, Wisconsin on April 26th, I'll just say April 20 something, 2016. The autopsy report was received by Mark Wiegert on June 1606, and that is in Queso. So
Right. So
now
the autopsy came long after, right?
Right.
And so okay.
So now here's where I'm going to argue with Travis a little bit. So I'm going to say, okay, lawyer A, I could argue as a lawyer, well, that's fraud because you said there was an autopsy when you signed this document and there wasn't. And one lawyer, I think it's just unclear. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I know the answer, but I'm saying to me that's a reasonable argument, just as a normal Joe Blow person. Now, lawyer, I guess whatever other lawyer could argue, well, I guess you can do that. But, can you just check that autopsy when there's no autopsy? And where is the autopsy report? Because supposedly Uyghur received a copy of this autopsy report, but it's not in any of the documents, that have been obtained, through with all the other stuff with this case. And I have not seen a copy of it. Fascinating stuff, isn't it, Erekose?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, somewhat. Obviously, it's hard to learn about all this stuff.
I was teasing because you were yawning, but
I realize. I'll take my shot of caffeine though.
And by the way, I know this is my segue because normally on the DNA, normally we do DNA, which of course is much more exciting than this. But there have been so many questions, so we just wanted to talk about this now. James, no body, no crime. Well, you know what I mean. That's could be an argument, and so again, I think unfortunately this was not. But see, people sometimes get hung up, and I hear this from a lot of people. Well, Beauty and Strang didn't contest it, therefore it must not be a problem. Well, that's not necessarily true. Just because they didn't contest it doesn't mean it wasn't a problem.
Let me put it to you guys this way. Let me suggest that this might happen. If Zellner was to start putting in her, or was to have put in her briefs that she wants to contest the death certificate and whether or not Teresa Halbach is actually dead, do you really think that these judges would really take her seriously, or do you think that they would immediately show her brief into the waste paper basket? I mean, you got to imagine the people that she's writing these briefs to, and even if she thinks there may be some merit or some meat on those bones, she probably realizes that if she tried to raise that issue, that it would probably piss people off and make them not consider all the other issues that she's raised that have merit. So there may be an aspect of that to it as well. And then it goes silent.
Yeah.
I was just saying. But
yeah, it's but
I mean, that's not something that judges. I mean, I can imagine these judges would not be amused by that type of argument.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and actually, I did want to, because I just looked it up. It looks like they must have changed the numbering system. Whoever wrote that Michael Claser's license number is something different than that 0008. It actually is, because I just looked it up. But at the 2 years ago, when I did look it up, it was that 008. So they must have changed the numbering system.
Okay.
So that's the deal there. And then I guess this is not. Well, I think it's an interesting factoid. So that's how. So the issue is the autopsy. Is that right or wrong? Where is the autopsy report? I think.
Well, yeah, I certainly think there should be that report.
I think that report will be very enlightening. My theory is the report didn't go along with what
the prosecution thought happened.
Yeah, because the report was probably more, honest. And also, I believe Steer was involved, because now remember, Leslie Eisenberg took these skull fragments and patched them together and then x-rayed them, to make this hole that the bullet went through. And just a little background, which I think, again, this is just information that you can take with what you will, but I think it could be relevant. Michael Steer, in 2011, spoke out in the media about how so this is an x-rays and skulls. And if any of you search the literature, Rule, a bunch of us have been talking about this also in the chat, about all the problems with these shaken baby cases, for instance, like Melissa Kalinzinski and skull fractures. So and this is why I consider Michael Steer. I say there's MEs who are players and ones who aren't players. And I consider him a not player, which is a good thing, in that he came out in the media and said that he felt in this case where a woman was convicted, he felt pressured by the prosecutors, one of them being Fallon, our friend from this case, to say there was a fracture when there wasn't. So I cannot prove, but, I think one could reasonably maybe think, well, maybe he wasn't comfortable being pressured to say there was a bullet hole or something, that maybe he wasn't
Open
as
to that.
willing to
Okay.
as willing to play along
Right.
as perhaps Mr. Dr. Jensen was,
Right.
who in this other case also did play along.
Dr.
Personal
Jekyll.
personal theory, something to think about. Nothing proven. But these are all things to think about.
What's your occupation, Scooby? If you don't mind. Somebody
What's my
asked.
what's my occupation? Most recent occupation isn't working at a university in a department doing research and teaching. That's
Hmm.
kind of as much as I want to say right now. Is that
Okay,
okay?
fair enough. In
But I
terms
don't
of,
work. Oh, but I don't work in the forensics world. Okay, I work in the. So if that, I don't know what they're getting at with that.
so I think
But
she's
but
asking. I think she's asking. What? So I here. Let me answer this question. I think.
oh
So she has a background in molecular biology, right?
yeah, but I have a very eclectic background, and so without getting in it, that's just so I came from the clinical medical world, and then I went on. I got a PhD in molecular biology, and I also have a background in neuroscience. And then I ended up and I've also worked in the Department of Exercise Physiology. So, but a lot of those sciences kind of blend together. So when I talk,
And
so
she has
I
studied this case extensively on top of all of those things.
yeah. So even so I don't. Right, which anybody could do. I know a lot of people on Reddit who don't have um, um,
Did
what could
Dr.
I say,
Jensen get paid?
degrees or whatever. Of course he did. He testified for the prosecution. Of course he got paid.
Okay.
Um, the you can learn a lot about this stuff. I know a lot of people who are very well versed in this stuff and don't come across, and don't have a lot of background, but have studied it. And as
Right.
far as Carol Ann, we can talk, but I don't try to present myself as any kind of expert about anything. I try to be a teacher and help explain things. And I'm not trying to tell people what to think. I'm just trying to what could I say? Use the knowledge I have to just help encourage people to think about things. I don't know. That's good enough for now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody can talk to me privately if they choose
Yeah.
to.
You guys can
Okay.
find Scooby on Discord. She spends a lot of time. What are you, number 3 now? In the rankings there.
And
So
yeah.
you guys can find Scooby on Discord
Yeah.
quite often.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. And for the public, I live in Wisconsin, and so that's some of my reason for my vagueness. And I'm doing this. How can I say it? I'm doing this kind of just like any of you are. This is a hobby. I'm not representing any
Agency.
company or institution, agency, exactly. And so I don't want to, how can I say, drag anybody else into this. I'm just like you all, just a person who's interested in this, and I just happen to have a background, and so some people have thought it useful that I'm able to provide some information, just like many people here are able to provide information in their particular areas. So
Right. Right.
so anyway, so that's that. Okay, enough about me. Okay. And so the other thing, so that's interesting background when you think about, well, I think it's interesting. Some people might not, as to why were some people, who was chosen to be on this case? Well,
Mm-hmm.
versus who wasn't, were, people that would most likely go along with the story, and some
Right.
people. So I guess this isn't that huge of a deal. That just hopefully, unless people have any other questions, but
Well, I think it raises concerns. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I think everybody who has issues with this death certificate, then yes, it raises concerns for you. Those are criminal justice concerns, and if those are concerns for you, then you have to raise them. Um, but only thing I'm saying here is raise them. Go ahead and try to make change in the future so that it takes something a little more concrete to determine a death in the future if you want, if that's something you're passionate about. But I'm just pointing out that in this case, trying to argue that is going to be pointless because back at 2005 in Wisconsin, the means that they used to determine her death are going to be accepted as fine. and you're going to be, I mean, you're just going to spend a lot of time barking up a tree. Nobody's going to care you're barking up.
Well,
Is, you know,
that's one person's opinion. I mean,
well,
on the other,
I mean, in terms of trying to change it, but if in turn, if and the difference I'm trying to say here is if you went to a different tree of trying to make change for the future, barking up that tree is more likely to give you something more gratifying.
oh, right. And I agree. Nothing, well, look at what they don't have a problem with in this court. I mean, this is just one more piece. But like I said, I mean, for me, what I think it shows is the way things were manipulated
Yeah,
and used. Like, I don't think, I mean, is it a coincidence that the death certificate happened to be signed on 12/5 and the lab report with these purported results shows up on 12/5, the day before the preliminary hearing? Well, to me, that means the death certificate was, the purpose of the death certificate was to be a piece of evidence, if you will, that the body was dead. And legally, yes, as Travis said, they were able to do that
right.
because there are no real standards. So it didn't really, in this bizarre situation. So it's just another way of how it's an interesting, I think, example of how they're able to manipulate things to show their cause. And so it's interesting, I think, from that perspective. So
Well, Shweezy, if
anyway.
you want to see a Canadian flag behind me, you got to send it.
Okay, so hopefully,
Sorry,
if
go ahead.
anybody has any questions, we can look otherwise, or any questions about anything else. But I don't know. I think that was hopefully cleared. So, did it clear anything up for anybody, or maybe it caused confusion? I think it was. I think
I
it.
think a lot of people agree with some of your issues with the death certificate. I think they were voicing them. There was a lot of people that were voicing some very heated concerns throughout this. Um, but also, everybody thinks you're well qualified and appreciates your time here.
Yes, it
Thinks you're
did for
doing
me. Thank you, Travis. And
thinks you're
Travis,
doing
I agree with you. Yeah, and Travis, you're right. The only problem is the Manitoba County coroner requested the oh well, I'm not sure if she requested him to do that because according to the interview I saw with her on MAM, she was just sort of cut out, and then by default he did that. But
yeah.
she was prevented from doing anything. Yes, that's true.
Shweezy, email me.
So this was just kind of a, short little thing. And next time, and you guys let me know what you want to know about DNA, but my next thought is to do, well, maybe some things because Eric's going to get into what's that called, post conviction motion next week. And if there's any
The motion
science
for
thing,
post conviction relief. Yes.
yes, thank you. You
Mhm.
see how much of a legal beagle I am. Get that? Legal beagle. So I I if there's anything related to, otherwise the next big topic that I think there's a lot of questions about is the mitochondrial DNA, because
Sure.
most people don't really understand that kind of what it is, what's the difference, why you do it. I have a lot of questions about that, and I think a lot of people are interested
Sure.
in
Yes.
understanding that. So
Think that's a good one for us to tackle next weekend.
yeah, so let me know, people, if you have interest, or if there's other things you're more interested in.
Mhm. All right.
Okay.
Well, I think we've covered the death certificate here today.
Anybody else want to talk about
Any
it?
other
Well,
questions before we
Eric,
go into Stacy? So what I really want to know is if he says, "Are you going to go my way?" I'm going to throw Lenny Kravitz at him.
who said that? Oh,
But what?
yes. What is the shin bone connected to?
No.
The shin bone. The shin bone's connected to. Well, it depends on which end you're looking at. EDA testing, how does it work? Oh, that's a whole other video. We're not going to talk about that. Yeah, it doesn't work. that's that's the short answer. The knee bone. Yes, Travis. It is very good. The shin bone's connected to the knee bone. The knee bone's connected. Very good, Travis. You're a budding anatomist.
There you go. He just wants to play doctor.
Unless you're OJ. Oh, I think that's meant about the EDTA. Yeah.
All right, so any more questions instead of everybody singing the thigh bone song
Yeah,
or the
get ready to
the
get
shin
ready
bone
to,
song?
let's get ready to jam.
Maybe we'll get Stacy to record a version of the bone song.
Yeah, maybe he'll make a song about the bones. We can collaborate.
Hit the like button, everybody, please. Please, please,
Yes,
please hit the like button.
please. Like, even if you didn't like this video, like Eric. No, but actually, I think hopefully this gives you some. I think
Carol
it
Ann,
clarifies.
Carol Ann, below the video in the description is a link to Discord. It's right there. It'll be there if you ever need it. It's right there. Sorry.
Yeah, but there were a lot of questions about the system in Wisconsin, and so hopefully that and the autopsy and who can do an autopsy. So at least we got that clarified. So hopefully that was a good one.
Yeah.
On psychic detectives. So, and it's like you say, it's a lot of questions. What I want to know is, where is the autopsy report? Yep. And if anybody can get that for me, I'll give you, I don't know, a kiss.
Let me tell you about it.
All right.
Woo. Okay. Thank you for being here, everyone.
Thank you for being here, Scooby. Thank you for everybody for showing up to listen to us.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, come on to Discord for the Saturday night party. Hit that like button, because there's no one better than Erekose, and subscribe to him, because otherwise you're going to be missing out on all the latest, greatest content about this case and other important cases.
Scooby. Scooby.
Yay! Have I even been on the screen all this time?
All right. Well, now here we go.
Okay.
Now we're gonna talk about the law enforcement, a right bunch of clowns. How they wear their badge like a plastic crown. How they're sticking to a story of which they are now bound. It's a rabbit hole that I want you to go down. But over in Wisconsin, they're doubling down. You see, they framed them once, then they did it again. They did not count on filmmakers making M.A.M. They thought their lives were safe, always by the ruse. They did not figure on 19 million views. It'll make you shake your head and probably frown. But over in Wisconsin, they're doubling down.
I don't know if it's working.
Yes, you're here. I see you.
Okay. Yes, prayers to Jamie Claus's family.
Yes, indeed.
I said they're double down. They're gonna triple down.
They're headed down a road they cannot turn around. They walk around like they'll be home free. They control all the local judges and talent as a state's AG. But I got some news. It's as plain as day. No matter what the state or the guilders say. But we got Kathleen. She's got him in her sights. She's a real life hero, turning wrongs to right. And no matter how hard that state's gavel pounds, over in Wisconsin, they're coming down. No matter how hard that state's gavel pounds, their house of cards is coming down. It'll make you shake your head and probably frown. Over in Wisconsin, they're coming down. Get on the train before it leaves the station. Wisconsin versus Avery, a complete fabrication. Get on the train before it leaves town. The truth train coming, gonna run them down. Run them down.
we all know.
No.
Stephen and Brendan were blamed, but it does not take a brain surgeon to see that they were framed. Yes, we know.
No. Brain surgeon.
What this was about. The civil suit settlement
They did not want to pay out, not want to pay out.
Hey, can you hear me, Eric?
Show everybody Scooby.
And you may hear this song.
Scooby, Scooby, Scooby. Where you at, buddy? Hey, there it is.
Can you see him?
Yes. Hey, Scoobs. What's up, buddy?
Trial transcripts, evidence files, and reports. And you start to fathom the corruption within the courts now as you shake your head. Because everything seems demented. You will find yourself in company beyond bank judges that dissented. But don't you worry. You're not going insane. You just happen to sit down
on Zelda's Truth Train. Get on the train.
I said before we leave the station, final destination, inevitable exoneration. Get on the train. Oh, before we leave town, the truth train coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Oh, look at Scoob.
He used to be afraid of the tambourine.
What's up, Scoob?
He's like, he doesn't like the tambourine.
All right, folks, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. You know the routine. It was a pleasure having you, Scooby, and we got to see actual Scooby today. That was awesome.
Yeah, pleasure being here. I know this one, was a little drier, but it was a good. That's okay.
Hey, we had over 100 people at one point, so that's
but we're gonna have just wait till we get into the mitochondrial DNA. That's gonna be really exciting. I know people are gonna be, just waiting with bated breath for that. So, okay.
All righty, Scoobs.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be on with Paul and Mark doing a call with them. And possibly one other surprise. I'm hoping we're going to have one other guest with us, but I don't know yet. But everybody cross your fingers for the extra guest. Let's hope that person shows up. All righty, guys.
Thank you. Happy Saturday, everyone.
Bye-bye.